The calm April afternoon of 2021 began with an unusual disturbance on North Louise Street. 4 unmarked police cars quietly pulled up in front of a modest single-story house in Glendale, California. Neighbors peeked through their curtains as officers in tactical vests took up positions around the area. Inside, Daniel Flores, 58 years old, was preparing his afternoon coffee. A routine he had maintained for more than a decade, as a widower still trying to hold on to his old rhythm of life after the disappearance of his wife. The urgent knocking came at 6:58 p.m. Daniel Flores, Glendale Police Department. We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the disappearance of Rachel Flores in 2007. The officers later described Daniel's hands trembling slightly as he set the coffee cup down, but his face remained strangely calm, as if he had known this moment was coming and for the past 14 years had simply been waiting for the day it would finally knock at his door. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. In April 2007, the northern Glendale neighborhood had the characteristic tranquility of Los Angeles suburbs. Tree-lined streets, rows of single-story homes, and daily routines revolving around work and school schedules. In that neighborhood, Rachel Flores, 51 years old, lived with her husband Daniel Flores, an officer with the Metro Division of the LAPD. Rachel worked at a childcare center in Echo Park, leaving for work on a fixed schedule, usually returning home before 4 p.m. and spending most of the evening preparing meals, organizing paperwork for the next workday, or taking walks around the neighborhood. Her habits had changed very little over the years, making it easy for those around her to notice if anything unusual occurred. April 17, 2007, began as a completely ordinary day. In the morning, Rachel left home on time, and all activities at the center where she worked proceeded without any disruption. Around midday, the neighbor across the street saw Rachel in the backyard while he went out to his car to get something. She was hanging out a few light pieces of clothing and watering plants along the fence. There was no sign that she was experiencing any health or emotional issues. Around early afternoon, Rachel was believed to have gone back inside the house as usual. From that point, according to her daily schedule, she would tidy up the kitchen, review her work notes, and prepare to leave for the end-of-day staff meeting at the center. But by nearly 5 p.m., the on-duty staff realized Rachel had not shown up and had not called in absent. Repeated calls from coworkers went unanswered. Several relatives tried contacting her afterward, but experienced the same: no response, no reply messages. The phone rang but no one picked up. The silence stretched into the early evening, causing those who knew Rachel to begin worrying. She was known for being punctual and had never missed a meeting or appointment without notifying someone in advance. Around 7 p.m., Daniel returned home after his shift. He noticed the front door was locked as usual, but there was no sound inside the house. The living room and kitchen showed no signs that Rachel had recently left for a short time. His wife's phone was still on the table by the window, her purse remained in its usual place, and there was no note indicating she had any reason to leave suddenly. Daniel checked around the house, the backyard, and along the path Rachel typically used when going out, but found no trace. When continued attempts to reach her failed, and there was no evidence that Rachel had left voluntarily, every detail of the day became strikingly unusual. At 9:40 p.m., after nearly 3 hours of unsuccessful self-searching and contacting, Daniel made the decision he had tried to delay. He reported his wife missing. Daniel's missing person call was logged into the Glendale Police Department system at 9:41 p.m., and within less than 10 minutes, a patrol team was dispatched to the address on North Louise Street. Upon arrival, the first 2 officers noted the exterior condition of the house. No signs of forced entry, the front and back doors were locked properly. The front porch light was on as timed, and no items had been left unusually on the walkway. Daniel opened the door to receive them, visibly tense but still calm enough to provide information. The officers asked him to recount the entire sequence of events, the time he left home in the morning, the last time Rachel was seen, the time he returned home, and the actions he took before deciding to call the police. Daniel provided the basic timeline. Rachel was still home in the early afternoon, after which he was unable to reach her from after 4 p.m. And when he returned around 7 p.m., Rachel was nowhere in the house. The officers recorded the physical description, the last known clothing observed by the neighbor at noon, and Rachel's daily habits to assess the level of anomaly. After completing the initial information collection, the officers conducted a preliminary walkthrough of the scene within the front yard, backyard, and side walkways. At the front door, the doormat was undisturbed, and the lock showed no signs of tampering or impact. The side pathway leading to the backyard had no skid marks, no unusual soil adhesion, or scattered objects. In the backyard, where Rachel had been seen by the neighbor in the early afternoon, all items remained in their original positions, from the garden hose, folding chairs, to the climbing plants along the fence. Visually, there was no indication of a hurried departure from the house or any unusual collision occurring between the afternoon and evening. As they moved through each area, the officers kept returning to the central question: from where and how did the victim leave the house? However, with the available data, they could not yet determine the direction of movement or the precise time of departure. While one officer continued checking entry-exit points, the other sat with Daniel in the living room to establish the essential background information required for a California missing persons file. Detailed personal information, travel habits, health status, work schedule, and degree of dependence on personal items such as phone, wallet, and transportation. All data indicated that Rachel had no history of suddenly leaving home, had never cut contact with family, and had shown no prior activity before April 17, suggesting she was preparing to leave Glendale. After the file was established, the patrol team began compiling all available data for the last confirmed sighting of Rachel, midday in the backyard, followed by a gap extending until Daniel returned home. Based on Daniel's duty schedule, the unanswered contact attempts, and Rachel's absence from the staff meeting at work, the officers outlined a preliminary time window that needed close verification from 1 p.m. to around 7 p.m. This was the period during which they believed the victim may have left the house somehow or encountered a situation leading to her disappearance. Because Rachel was an adult but exhibited signs of an unusual disappearance, no phone, no call-in absence, no contact with anyone after 4 p.m., Glendale PD activated high-priority status for the initial search. That night, information was sent to affiliated units to confirm no matching unidentified emergency cases, while marking the Flores residence as the starting point for all subsequent search operations. Although no evidence pinpointed a direction of departure, completing the missing persons report and establishing foundational timelines became the first step for authorities to move forward with the next actions in the search for Rachel. Immediately after the missing persons file was established and the preliminary timelines for April 17 were set, Glendale PD launched the first search phase within a close radius of the home to verify whether Rachel might have left the area on foot. 3 search teams were assigned to 3 main directions. The first team covered routes leading toward Brand Boulevard, an area with many shops and transit lines. The second team headed toward the quiet residential area along Louise Street and its connecting side streets to the east. The third team swept the nearby terrain toward a small park 2 blocks away. The division of forces was based on the assumption that if Rachel left the house in the afternoon or early evening, she would almost certainly have followed familiar paths and not crossed wooded areas or steep roads at night. As the teams began moving, the officer at the command post continuously updated the map, marking each check path and recording progress speed. The first team searched sidewalks and pedestrian routes along Brand Boulevard, where streetlights were bright and traffic was heavier. They quickly asked businesses still open, but no one had seen a woman matching the description pass by that afternoon or evening. The second team covered the completely quiet residential direction. Houses were closed, yard lights sparse, and no signs of any notable events. They stopped at 8 homes within an 800-meter radius to ask about unusual sounds or movements in the afternoon. Some residents said they had been home all day and heard nothing beyond normal traffic. Only one household confirmed hearing a woman's voice louder than usual around early afternoon, consistent with initial file information, but they could not identify who was speaking or whether anyone left afterward. The third team checked the pedestrian path leading to the small park and nearby trail area, a place Rachel sometimes walked, though the path was usually empty in the evening. K-9 units were deployed here to track scent. The police dog started from the back gate of the Flores home, following Rachel's scent retained on personal items. Initially, the K-9 followed the route commonly used by local residents to cross the block behind, but near the end of the path, close to a large trash bin by the roadside, the scent weakened dramatically and disappeared completely. The loss of scent at this point showed no specific turning direction, nor any prolonged trail to follow further. Based on experience, this can occur when the victim changes surfaces, such as entering a vehicle, or when the scent is disrupted by environmental conditions. Officers returned to check the area around the point of loss for small items like paper, tissues, cards, or any dropped objects, but nothing matching Rachel's personal belongings was found. After completing the close radius search, all data was compiled. No witnesses saw Rachel leave the area. No physical evidence indicated a direction of travel, and the scent trail only extended a short distance before vanishing. The search teams concluded that if Rachel had left the house, her journey left no clear traces within the immediate vicinity, and the absence of any direct evidence increased the difficulty of determining the next steps in the investigation. After completing the close radius search around the home without obtaining any direct traces, Glendale PD moved to the urban sweep phase, focusing on major roads and commercial areas around Rachel's residence to determine whether she might appear on security cameras or have used public transportation. The technical team compiled a list of all traffic cameras and private cameras on the nearest major corridors, Brand Boulevard, with its concentration of shops and services, Colorado Street, connecting the residential and commercial zones, and several intersections with city traffic cameras. Officers contacted business owners one by one to extract footage from 2 p.m. to after 7 p.m., the time frame during which Rachel might have passed through on foot if she left the house. However, the quality of 2007 cameras in small businesses was relatively low, with low frame rates and limited angles, making identification difficult. Nevertheless, each video segment was manually reviewed, but no clear images matching Rachel's description were found. Another team checked cameras at gas stations along Brand Boulevard and the Colorado State area to verify whether the victim might have stopped to buy something or use a payphone. All results were negative. In addition, a series of CCTV cameras at ATM locations around Glendale were reviewed, as ATM machines often have forward-facing cameras that sometimes capture passers-by. Systems from 3 banks within a 1.5 kilometers radius of the Flores home were checked, including after-hours footage from a 24/7 ATM. None of the recordings showed any figure or movement attributable to Rachel during the suspected time frame. While the camera team processed footage, another unit contacted hospitals, including Adventist Health Glendale and USC Verdugo Hills Hospital, to inquire whether any unidentified female patients, those without ID, or individuals admitted in a confused state, injured, or unconscious, had been received between the afternoon and evening of April 17th. The results showed no records matching Rachel's description, and no intake reports aligned with the time of her disappearance. Glendale PD continued expanding checks to emergency rooms, urgent care centers, and community health facilities, but found no noteworthy information. A parallel effort involved collecting data from the Metro bus system, which operates multiple routes through the Glendale, Los Angeles area. Police contacted Metro to obtain route schedules, stop times, and the list of drivers on duty that day. The goal verify whether any driver had seen a passenger matching Rachel's description, or whether onboard cameras recorded any unusual boarding alighting. Most drivers reported seeing no passengers matching the police description, and bus routes operating near the Flores family home showed no matching images. Several bus stops were physically checked for signs that the victim had waited there, such as dropped items, notes, or resident observations, but nothing useful was found. When the urban sweep phase concluded, all data, including dozens of hours of video, quick statements from drivers, ATM and gas station camera checks, and hospital verifications, was compiled. The conclusion was clear. No camera or surveillance system recorded any image of Rachel during the suspected time frame, and there was no evidence that she used public transportation or appeared at any public locations around Glendale that afternoon or evening. This reinforced the assessment that if Rachel had left the house, her journey did not take place along major roads or areas with surveillance cameras, making the scope and direction of the ongoing search even more difficult to determine. After all, urban patrol data returned negative results, and no evidence could be found, proving that Rachel had traveled along any of Glendale's major roadways during the afternoon or evening of April 17. The Glendale PD was forced to shift their approach, expanding the search into natural terrain areas, locations with low camera density, minimal foot traffic, and where clear visual traces are typically not left behind. This was a necessary pivot once field data had virtually confirmed that the victim had not appeared in residential zones. Since the northern part of Glendale borders the Verdugo Mountains, a long range of hills and mountains featuring numerous trails and hidden footpaths through wooded areas, Glendale PD directly contacted the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Search and Rescue Unit, the specialized team responsible for complex terrain searches. The SR team agreed to deploy immediately the following morning, bringing positioning equipment, climbing gear, and dedicated frequency radio communication systems. Upon arriving at the staging area in northern Glendale, investigators and SR personnel conducted an extended topographic map assessment, identifying trails that an average pedestrian could realistically reach within a few hours if they left home in the afternoon. They utilized elevation maps, recreational trail maps, and key terrain landmarks, such as small valleys, trail junctions, flat clearings, and dense vegetation zones, to prioritize targets. The map review process resulted in dividing the Verdugo Mountains into three primary search zones. Zone 1, the area along Las Flores Trail, running along the eastern slope, easily accessible and commonly used by residents for walking. Zone 2, the section of Verdugo motorway heading northwest, less frequented and containing many concealed spots. Zone 3, the area where smaller intersecting trails lie deeper in the forest, featuring complex terrain, but still within SAR's operational reach. Each zone was assigned a team of 6 to 8 members, including both Glendale PD personnel and SR specialists, to ensure consistent data recording and identification of points of interest. While moving along Las Flores Trail, the first team focused on inspecting the trail surface, surrounding bushes, and areas near the trail edges for signs of dropped personal items, a detail that had appeared in several previous missing persons cases when personal belongings became dislodged. Shoe prints, drag marks, or small soil disturbances were also carefully observed, as they could reveal direction of travel or human presence in the area. The second team pushed deeper into Verdugo motorway, following wider but more deserted trails, occasionally used by mountain bikers or hikers. The rugged terrain made the sweep more time-consuming, yet they still examined every incline, every turn, and every small embankment where objects might be carried by soil movement or wind. The third team handled the dense brush area, using probing poles and GPS equipment to ensure no hidden corners were missed. They checked small rock cavities, deep gullies, and locations where light objects such as scarves, paper, or clothing could become snagged. After more than 3 hours of continuous searching, the second team reported the discovery of a suspicious item located at the edge of a narrow section of trail on Verdugo motorway. The item was a small piece of fabric whose color matched the description of the scarf Rachel usually carried while walking. The fabric was caught between two low branches near slightly depressed soil, in a condition that was not excessively dirty or degraded, suggesting it had not been there for an extended period. This discovery was immediately reported to the Field Command Center. Glendale PD ordered all activity in the discovery area halted, established a 50-meter radius containment zone, and set up a security perimeter. The technical team proceeded to the location, used GPS to record precise coordinates, and photographed the scene before collecting the evidence according to protocol. Simultaneously, SR used marking stakes to define the boundaries of the verification area for subsequent in-depth examination. The appearance of this item did not provide a direct conclusion about Rachel's presence in the area, but it was significant enough to require the search force to reassess the possibility that she had passed through the Verdugo Mountains around the time of her disappearance. At the end of the day's search operations, all terrain data, GPS coordinates, and evidence locations were compiled in preparation for the next phase of analysis, while also strengthening the hypothesis that if Rachel had left home heading north, the likelihood of her having entered the mountainous area had increased significantly, though still without definitive proof. The item recovered from the trail edge on Verdugo motorway was immediately transported to Glendale PD for detailed examination, beginning the analysis phase to determine whether it was genuinely related to Rachel or simply an object coincidentally left behind by another hiker. The technical unit conducted a physical inspection before sampling. It was a small piece of light blue fabric, with faint stitching along the edges, made of synthetic fiber blended with cotton. The fabric surface showed no signs of severe tearing, only light fraying at one corner, suggesting it may have snagged on a branch or experienced friction against the ground. Compared to the surrounding rocky soil environment where it was found, the fabric was relatively clean, allowing the initial assessment that it had not been exposed at the location for a long time. Technicians also checked fiber moisture content to estimate exposure time to the outdoor environment, combined with temperature and humidity data from the Verdugo area the previous day, to estimate that the piece had most likely been dropped within the past 24 to 48 hours. Following the physical examination, the testing team directly compared the item against photographs of Rachel's personal belongings provided by the family. Among items she commonly carried, Rachel owned a light blue handkerchief with minimal pattern, described as something she frequently kept in her pocket while walking or going to work. Detailed comparison of stitching, color, and material between the known handkerchief and the recovered fabric fragment showed a high degree of similarity, although absolute confirmation was impossible since Rachel's complete handkerchief had not yet been located. Nevertheless, based on the technician's assessment and the personal property images, investigators temporarily classified the fabric piece as a potentially related piece of evidence that needed to be placed in its geographic and contextual setting for further evaluation. Next, PD evaluated 3 possible scenarios for the evidence: discarded, dropped, or dragged. If discarded, greater force would typically result in greater distance from the trail into the brush, yet the discovery location was right at the trail edge, not far from the walking path. If dropped, it was highly probable the fabric slipped out at the moment the victim, if she had indeed been present, passed through the gentle incline section. The scene showed no signs of trampling or deep soil adhesion, supporting this possibility. The scenario of being dragged by wind or small animals would only occur if the item had lain off the trail for an extended period, but the relatively clean condition of the fabric made this hypothesis less convincing. After evaluating these 3 possibilities, the search force decided to expand the sweep radius around the discovery point to check for any additional related traces. SAR coordinated with PD to return to Verdugo motorway that same afternoon for an extended search within a 300-meter to 500-meter radius. The area was divided into small grid cells to prevent oversights, and each team was equipped with marking stakes to record notable terrain features such as disturbed soil, broken branches, or unusual physical marks. The first team swept the trail section extending westward, checking every soil edge where light objects might catch, but found no additional signs. The second team moved down the lower slope, where the terrain featured more loose rock and thicker brush. However, aside from a few naturally occurring dry leaves and broken twigs, nothing noteworthy was observed. The third team focused on the northward offset trail, where tall trees provided heavy canopy and dim light, yet meticulous inspection yielded no results. K-9 units were redeployed to search for scent trails in the expanded area, starting from the fabric discovery point. Although there was a slight reaction along a nearby trail segment, the dog could not establish a clear direction, and the signal quickly faded when moving farther away. This led PD to conclude that, while evidence existed at the scene, it did not produce a continuous or sufficiently strong scent trail to follow. After nearly 4 hours of extended searching, the team recorded that the area surrounding the discovery point contained no additional items clearly connected to Rachel, nor any signs of prolonged human presence, such as fresh footprints, drag marks, or unusually disturbed objects. Therefore, the item was regarded as an important suggestive lead, but not yet sufficient to establish a specific investigative direction. At the conclusion of the day's operations, Glendale PD compiled terrain data, GPS coordinates of the evidence discovery, and 360-degree sweep results to create a risk zone map. This map marked 2 layers of priority areas, the first being the exact evidence discovery point, and the second being the 500-meter radius surrounding it. Both zones would become the focal point of further analysis to determine whether Rachel had ever been present in the Verdugo Mountains. When the examination of items found at Verdugo Motorway failed to provide a clear direction, Glendale PD returned to the still unresolved core focus, the system of statements from residents around the Flores house area. The goal was to more precisely determine the timeline during the afternoon of April 17th, since all other data continued to revolve around a prolonged blind spot from early afternoon to evening, the period during which Rachel virtually disappeared from all records. First, investigators compiled all statements collected from the initial search day, accounts from neighbors directly across from the Flores house, residents on the same block, and some from the adjacent block. They grouped the statements into 3 categories: unusual sounds heard, times when movement was observed around the Flores house, and any individuals described as resembling Rachel seen in the area. Among the statements, 2 neighbors were considered the most reliable sources because both were habitually home in the afternoon and had clear views of the Flores backyard. The first, who lived directly across, confirmed seeing Rachel around midday while she was watering plants. The second, living 2 houses away, reported hearing sounds resembling loud, somewhat tense voices between approximately 1:15 and 1:40 p.m. Although the content or speakers could not be identified, PD marked this time frame as aligning with the start of the afternoon, creating an important reference point for comparison with Daniel's statement. The second group of statements mainly came from residents active in the afternoon, but without direct line of sight to the Flores house. Some reported seeing a woman in light-colored clothing walking along Louise Street around 4 p.m. But when investigators showed photos of Rachel for confirmation, both witnesses admitted they were not certain and only thought it looked similar. This caused these 2 statements to be excluded from the core information group due to low reliability and lack of specific details matching Rachel's habits or clothing. Another statement came from the adjacent block, where a resident said he saw a petite woman walking quickly toward an intersection in the late afternoon. However, after comparing the time the witness was at that location and the limited viewing angle, PD determined a high likelihood of misidentification due to the distance and less than ideal lighting conditions at the time. This statement was also placed in the unconfirmed category and not used to build the main timeline. After eliminating inaccurate statements, PD focused on the 3 remaining information groups: direct observation of Rachel at midday, the unusual loud sounds between 1:15, 1:40, and the prolonged quiet period from after 2 p.m. until evening. These gaps were cross-checked against Daniel's initial statement taken on the first day of the investigation. Daniel stated that the last time he contacted his wife was in the early afternoon, but could not provide an exact time. He also reported that when he returned home around 7 p.m., the house was in normal condition with no signs of disturbance. However, a discrepancy emerged when compared with the neighbor's report of hearing loud voices Daniel made no mention of any conversation or argument during that time frame. This mismatch led PD to flag the early afternoon period as needing reanalysis, as it could be a pivotal point in the entire sequence of events. At the same time, the unusual silence from after 2 p.m. until nearly 5 p.m. was regarded as a high-risk window, during which Rachel was not seen by anyone and did not participate in her expected work activities. This was also the period Daniel claimed he could not reach Rachel, yet he provided no evidence proving he had actually attempted to call or text during that time. Glendale PD constructed a preliminary timeline diagram consisting of 4 phases. Phase 1. Rachel last seen in the backyard. Phase 2. Loud sounds, possible argument, or tense exchange. Phase 3. Complete blind spot, no sightings, no contact. Phase 4. No record of Rachel leaving the house or appearing at any urban location. This timeline revealed a lack of connection between what witnesses heard and what Daniel asserted. Up to this point, no statement confirmed that Rachel had ever appeared outside the house after midday, making the period from early afternoon the central focus of the analysis. The combination of witness statements with the complete absence of any visual records from municipal camera systems further highlighted that most of the events of April 17th had unfolded silently within the vicinity of the Flores house. Once the timeline cross-referencing was completed, PD obtained a temporary time framework clear enough to define the critical gaps, thereby establishing a foundation for determining what occurred during the hours when no one saw Rachel and which points required verification through additional evidence. After finalizing the preliminary timeline diagram and realizing that most suspicious time periods revolved around the house, Glendale PD returned to a more detailed re-examination of the interior crime scene at the Flores residence, treating it as the central focus to determine whether any unusual events had taken place before Rachel's disappearance. The objective of this inspection was not to find obvious signs of a struggle, since none had been recorded previously, but to check whether the arrangement of items, minor traces, or details related to daily routines matched Daniel's statement and witness accounts. The review began in the living room, where PD noted that the sofa and coffee table were in the positions Daniel described, with no major drag marks on the carpet or hardwood floor. However, under strong lighting, technicians observed several small fabric fibers caught on the edge of the table, possibly from clothing or a handkerchief. These fiber samples were collected and added to the inventory for comparison with the fabric piece found on Verdugo motorway. At the dining table, a half-drunk glass of water and a small plate with dried breadcrumbs remained on the wooden surface. Daniel stated that Rachel usually had a light snack in the early afternoon before preparing to return to the work center. However, the dryness of the food and the remaining water film in the glass led the forensics team to suspect the usage time might not align with Daniel's account of Rachel's midday routine. Samples from the glass and plate were taken for fingerprint and oil residue analysis. In the kitchen, cutlery and utensils were properly stored, but a dish towel left on the sink showed irregular folding, indicating it had been used that day. The kitchen appeared generally tidy, yet there was a partially washed glass in the sink with lingering soap streaks, suggesting someone had stood there more recently than midday. During the floor inspection, PD discovered a very faint footprint near the back door, pointing inward. The print was smaller than Daniel's shoe size. Although it could not be conclusively attributed to Rachel, the print was photographed and submitted for sole pattern analysis to compare with shoes in her closet. Notably, several items in the house showed signs of slight movement. A chair next to the dining table had been pulled out about 10 centimeters from its usual carpet indentations, and a small desk lamp in the home office was tilted slightly forward. Daniel had not mentioned using the home office that day, causing PD to note these deviations as details requiring later cross-checking. Next, the technical team focused on the desktop computer in the home office, a device Rachel normally used to check email and prepare documents for the Children's Center. In the computer usage history, they found the last login occurred in the morning of April 17th, when Rachel checked her work schedule as usual. However, from early afternoon until Daniel returned home, no further activity was recorded on the machine, which contradicted Daniel's claim that Rachel had worked on some documents in the afternoon. The time Rachel stopped using the computer aligned with the witness sighting of her in the backyard, further emphasizing the subsequent time gap. Beside the computer, PD checked the trash bin in the home office, but found no unusual notes or noteworthy torn papers. Other electronic devices, such as phone chargers, the printer and router, were functioning normally with no signs of sudden shutdown. The next area examined was the hallway leading to the back door. Technicians used fingerprint powder on the doorknob. While prints belonging to Rachel and Daniel were present, a faint, incomplete print of unknown origin was also found. On the hallway floor, PD observed several light scuff marks resembling worn shoe soles. However, their poor quality made it impossible to determine when they were made. When the footprint samples, fabric fibers, and samples from the Verdugo motorway fabric piece were analyzed in parallel, the forensics lab determined that the fibers collected in the living room had material composition similar to the fabric found on the trail, but not sufficient to conclude they came from the same source. This kept the connection between the indoor scene and the mountain evidence at the level of suspicion rather than direct proof. After collecting all available traces, Glendale PD compiled a summary report. No clear signs of struggle, fighting, overturned objects, or blood were present in the house. Nevertheless, a series of minor details, the slightly moved chair, the time-mismatched water glass and dried bread plate, unusual fabric fibers, unidentified faint footprint, and inconsistencies between Daniel's account and the computer usage history, created an overall picture that did not fully align with the husband's initial statement. The conclusion of this scene examination indicated that although the house showed no signs of a violent crime scene, the arrangement of items and domestic details inside did not completely match what Daniel described, forcing PD to reassess the credibility of his statement and consider the possibility that some events of the afternoon had not been fully recounted by him. After completing the interior scene examination and determining that the collected details did not support the possibility of Rachel leaving the house voluntarily, Glendale PD shifted to evaluating the voluntary departure theory, an investigative direction typically ruled out by thoroughly checking the victim's preparatory behavioral traces in the days leading up to the disappearance. The first step was to query Rachel's bank accounts and credit card transaction history. Records showed that in the 3 days before her disappearance, Rachel had only routine transactions, purchasing groceries at a local store, paying for gas in Daniel's car, and a small purchase at a children's educational supply store. On April 17th, there were no ATM withdrawals, no credit card payments, and no indication she had withdrawn cash in preparation to leave. Account balances remained stable, with no unusual transfers or emergency withdrawals. Glendale PD flagged this as a significant indicator, since in most cases of adults voluntarily leaving their daily life, they typically withdraw money or show unusual transactions beforehand. Next, investigators directly contacted the Children's Care Center, where Rachel worked, to verify her work schedule and behavior in the days leading up to the event. Colleagues reported that Rachel had attended all meetings fully and showed no signs of stress, conflict, or desire to take time off. The internal meeting scheduled for the afternoon of April 17th was an activity Rachel had never missed, and her unexplained absence was immediately considered abnormal by all coworkers. Additionally, her work schedule for that week showed no changes, no notes about requesting leave or plans for temporary absence. Glendale PD added the assessment that if Rachel had intended to leave her job or leave Glendale, it would have been highly unlikely for her to do so without leaving any trace in her schedule or conversations with close colleagues. Regarding personal electronic data, PD examined Rachel's email on the home computer and through provider queries. The last access recorded was in the morning of April 17th, when Rachel viewed her work schedule and opened a few work-related emails. After that time, no further access from Rachel's account occurred, including from her phone or any other device. This matched the data obtained during the scene examination, indicating that Rachel had not used any electronic devices after midday, making the theory of her voluntarily leaving even less plausible. When checking Rachel's personal devices, PD noted that her phone remained in the house, powered on but inactive from that afternoon onward. This was a crucial factor because any voluntary departure would almost certainly require a phone unless the person deliberately intended to cut off all contact. A behavior typically accompanied by preparatory signs, none of which Rachel exhibited. Glendale PD continued analyzing the phone activity records through call data and cell tower information. After 1 p.m. on April 17, Rachel's phone transmitted no connection signals, made or received no calls, and sent or opened no messages. There were no pings from towers away from the residence, meaning the device never left the coverage area around the neighborhood. This reinforced the conclusion that Rachel did not take her phone when leaving the house, completely contrary to her normal habits. Investigators also queried more detailed records from the previous month to see if Rachel had ever searched for information about leaving or expressed any such intention to anyone. The results showed no emails, messages, or calls suggesting this. All banking data, work schedule, personal devices, and phone activity consistently pointed to one conclusion: Rachel had made no preparations for any trip, short-term or long-term. Moreover, the fact that she left behind her phone, purse, wallet, and house keys, the bare minimum items any adult would take when leaving home, virtually eliminated the possibility of a spontaneous voluntary departure. Glendale PD concluded that the voluntary departure theory was inconsistent with her behavior, circumstances, habits, and objective data. The main investigative team officially classified this direction as extremely low probability, nearly eliminated from the range of plausible scenarios regarding Rachel's disappearance, making the questions surrounding the afternoon hours even more critical and in need of exploration through other investigative approaches. Once the voluntary departure theory was almost completely ruled out, the investigation focus returned to the only source capable of shedding light on Rachel's final observed hours. Rachel Flores' statements. Glendale PD began analyzing all statements he provided from the first day of the disappearance through subsequent interviews, aiming to determine consistency and cross-reference them with objective data. In his initial statement, Daniel said he left home early in the morning for his scheduled shift at Metro Division, working a long shift until late afternoon. He stated that during the midday period he had called home but received no response from Rachel. However, when PD checked the carrier call logs, they discovered Daniel had made only one short call around 2 p.m. Not several calls, as he described. This discrepancy caused PD to flag the statement as inaccurate, though not sufficient to prove intentional concealment. From there, PD requested a more detailed timeline from Daniel: the time he left LAPD Metro Division, the time he left the work area, and the time he arrived home. Daniel stated he left the station around 6:25 p.m. after finishing his shift, drove straight to Glendale, and arrived home around 7 p.m. But when PD cross-checked with the official LAPD duty roster, Daniel's shift that day ended earlier than expected, and he was recorded leaving the agency parking lot at approximately 5:52 p.m., nearly 30 minutes earlier than claimed. PD continued checking whether Daniel had stopped anywhere on the way home, but credit card logs and Metro Division parking lot cameras showed he left the workplace and headed straight toward Glendale without stopping at any gas stations, stores, or transaction points. When comparing the travel distance, a route normally taking under 20 minutes in normal traffic, PD identified a major issue. While the entire trip should have taken less than 20 minutes, Daniel claimed it took over an hour to travel from LAPD to home. The period from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. emerged as an unexplained gap. When asked about the exact time he left work, Daniel modified details in his second statement, saying he might have left a little later and there might have been traffic. However, when PD checked local traffic conditions on the afternoon of April 17th via Caltrans reports, traffic between downtown LA and Glendale was stable with no major incidents. This adjustment to his statement made the time gap even more conspicuous. PD further cross-referenced Daniel's timeline with the Metro Division radio system logs. Some internal activity records showed that Daniel had completed his duties early and did not participate in any coordination after 5:45 p.m. This corroborated the data that he left the agency earlier than reported. When PD asked Daniel to describe in detail what happened after he arrived home, his statement showed small changes between interviews. In the first, he said that upon opening the door, everything was completely normal, nothing unusual. In the second, he added that the kitchen light was on and an item he thought Rachel had used was still on the table. But when PD compared these details with the crime scene and neighbor statements, small inconsistencies began to appear. One neighbor living next door stated they did not see the backyard light on around 7 p.m., contrary to the description that Daniel might have looked into the backyard upon returning. These minor descriptive discrepancies do not in themselves prove criminal conduct, but in missing persons cases, lack of consistency is often a sign that part of the truth is being concealed or inaccurately reconstructed. PD compiled all discrepancies in Daniel's statements, the number of calls he claimed to have made, the time he left work, the travel time home, the condition of the house upon entry, and the activities he attributed to Rachel during the afternoon. When cross-checked against call logs, LAPD duty logs, parking lot cameras, traffic data, and the state of items in the house, many parts of Daniel's statements could not be corroborated by objective evidence. The period from 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. was not described by Daniel, despite a neighbor reporting hearing arguing voices. The period from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. remained completely unexplained. The time Rachel's phone was inactive overlapped with the period Daniel was on duty, but did not rule out the possibility that he could have left duty earlier. Combining these factors, Glendale PD placed Daniel in the primary suspect group, not because of direct incriminating evidence, but because his statements contained too many ambiguities, contradicted objective data, and failed to clarify any significant time periods on the day Rachel disappeared. When Daniel had been placed in the primary suspect group, but there was no direct evidence strong enough to either corroborate or refute his statements, Glendale PD was forced to compile the entire investigative process to assess the degree of deadlock in the case. All investigative leads, pursued over many months, yielded no clear results. A search within a radius near the house found no signs of movement. Urban sweeps and the camera system around Glendale recorded no images of Rachel during any of the suspicious time frames. Expanding the search to Verdugo Mountains only recovered one piece of fabric that could not be confirmed as belonging to the victim. An examination of the indoor crime scene showed no signs of struggle or forced entry, and discrepancies in the arrangement of objects were not sufficient to conclude anything. Cross-referencing witness statements only established a few vague reference points, but were nowhere near enough to reconstruct the final events of the afternoon of April 17th. Meanwhile, analysis of Daniel's statements revealed numerous contradictions and anomalies, but the absence of a body and the lack of any strong physical evidence meant all conclusions had to remain at the level of suspicion rather than evolve into evidence. Forensic efforts were severely limited due to the absence of a violent crime scene, no biological traces, no blood samples or drag marks, and no items sufficient to indicate the victim's path. Even the piece of fabric recovered on Verdugo motorway, the only piece of evidence found outside the Flores residence, could not prove it came from Rachel's clothing, as the material composition was extremely common and the discovery location suggested no specific direction of movement. Glendale PD also faced another objective difficulty. The quality of cameras in Glendale in 2007 was not sharp enough to serve a missing person investigation. The old ATM cameras could only capture vague shapes. Store cameras had low angles and resolution no better than motion detection. No video footage showed Rachel leaving the residential area, making it virtually impossible to determine which exit she might have used. Regarding vehicle tracking, the Metro bus system in 2007 was not yet equipped with comprehensive cameras, so verification of whether the victim had taken a bus relied solely on drivers' recollections without any supporting visual data. All other investigative leads, hospitals, emergency centers, homeless shelters, and public areas within many miles, came back completely negative. After a year, the case file grew thicker in waves, but showed no progress. There was no body for forensic examination, no personal items belonging to Rachel except those left behind in the house, no banking transactions or phone usage, and no preparatory behavior indicating the victim had left voluntarily. The only scenario still under consideration was an event occurring sometime between 1 and 2 p.m. But there was no way to fully reconstruct it without witnesses or verifiable evidence. This situation placed Glendale PD in a dead end. After months of trying to re-examine every lead, recheck every statement, research key areas, and re-interview Daniel without gaining any new clues, the investigators realized they no longer had any data in hand sufficient to expand or reconnect lines of reasoning. In early 2008, after consulting with specialized units and conducting a comprehensive evaluation according to Los Angeles County standards, Glendale PD decided to suspend active investigation and transfer the case to the cold case unit. Rachel Flores's file was sealed according to procedure, classified as an unresolved missing person case, and could only be reopened upon the emergence of new evidence, new witnesses, or legally significant material. The case officially entered a frozen state, with one huge question mark hanging unresolved: what really happened on the afternoon of April 17, 2007. In 2021, 14 years after Rachel Flores' file was transferred to the cold case unit and active investigation had ceased, an entirely unforeseen event broke the frozen status of the case. In late summer, the Bobcat Fire wildfire swept through the Angeles National Forest, burning tens of thousands of acres and exposing many areas previously hidden by dense vegetation. During post-fire inspection, a ranger team discovered a patch of ground with unusually deep burn signs. Erosion had revealed bright objects distinct from the surrounding rocks and roots. When the rangers bent down for a closer look, they noticed small bone fragments scattered among the ash and soil, prompting them to immediately report the matter to LASD with suspicion that these could be human remains. Within hours, LASD's crime scene investigation team arrived at the reported location. The area was deep in the forest, about 1 mile from the main trail, with rugged terrain sloping down into a shallow valley. The presence of human bones in such a remote location required immediate scene securing to prevent further loss of evidence from animals or passers-by. LASD cordoned off a 30-meter radius around the initial discovery point, established a restricted zone, and assigned forensic technicians to collect every bone fragment mixed in the burned soil. As excavation of the top layer began, more bone fragments continued to be found: arm bone pieces, part of a rib, fragmented skull pieces, and several loose vertebrae. Notably, some fragments were stained with hardened ash and soil, while others appeared relatively unaffected by heat, suggesting the body may have been shallowly buried before being exposed by the wildfire. Not far from the bone location, technicians discovered a dark piece of fabric, the remnants of a thin shirt heavily decomposed. Nearby were a metal zipper piece and a small sweater hook. Though most items had been severely damaged by time and the high heat of the fire, the surviving traces were still sufficient for LASD to collect them according to wildfire evidence preservation protocol, including photographing each item, recording GPS coordinates, and placing them in specialized cross-contamination-proof bags. The collection process extended into the next day, as a forensic team continued deep-layered excavation to ensure no bone pieces were missed. By the end of the first collection phase, they had recovered enough bone material to suspect this was the skeleton of an adult. Due to decomposition and post-fire soil disturbance, the original position or posture could not be reconstructed, but experts noted the bones were not scattered too widely, suggesting the body had once been temporarily buried at shallow depth. After all evidence was collected, LASD transferred it to the Los Angeles County Forensic Pathology Lab for anthropological analysis and DNA testing. The first test confirmed whether these were human remains. The result verified the skeleton belonged to an adult female. The next step was reconstructing skull and spinal fragments to check for signs of external force or trauma. Concurrently, technicians separated a sufficiently intact long bone for DNA extraction. Because the bone had undergone surface charring, the sample required multi-step processing to remove contaminants and recover the internal genetic material. After nearly 3 weeks, the lab reported they had obtained a usable DNA sequence and were ready to match it against missing persons records. Glendale PD was immediately contacted to provide DNA profiles of long-term missing persons in the area. Rachel Flores' biological profile had been stored in 2007 as part of standard procedure and was forwarded to LASD for comparison. Matching was given expedited priority due to the similarity between the skeletal description and the age of the missing victim. The result came back faster than expected. The DNA from the bone sample fully matched Rachel Flores' DNA profile. This match confirmed that the remains found in Angeles National Forest were those of the woman who disappeared from Glendale in 2007. This confirmation marked the first time in 14 years that the missing person case was no longer in an unidentified state. Glendale PD was immediately notified, and the discovery of the remains officially removed Rachel Flores' file from cold case status, paving the way for a complete reevaluation of the case. Once the identity of the remains was confirmed as Rachel Flores, the Los Angeles County Forensic Pathology Lab moved to the anthropological analysis phase to determine the mechanism of death and related forensic characteristics. The first step was reconstructing the skull from the fragments collected at the scene. Experts spent many hours piecing together the skull parts, starting with larger fragments from the forehead and temporal regions. Once the basic structure was reassembled, they quickly noticed a clear abnormality. A large portion of the right temporal bone was irregularly depressed, with radiating fracture lines around it. Under microscopic examination, the fracture lines showed fresh characteristics at the time of impact, meaning the bone was struck hard while the person was still alive or immediately before death, rather than due to fire or landslide. The fracture pattern was consistent with blunt force trauma, most likely caused by an object with a narrow contact surface, such as a metal rod, heavy tool handle, or hard appliance part. Based on the depth of the depression and the direction of crack propagation, forensic experts concluded the blow had to be forceful enough to cause severe concussion or immediate death. This was a critical clue, as it ruled out accident or natural fall scenarios. In parallel with the skull analysis, the anthropology team assessed the degree of skeletal weathering to estimate time of death. The bones exhibited typical long-term burial weathering, light gray color, slight surface erosion, and rounded softened bone edges due to soil friction. However, uneven ash adhesion indicated the body was not lying on the surface during the wildfire, but had been buried at a shallow depth of 10–25 centimeters. Some bone fragments lay beneath unburned soil layers, showing the body was buried before 2021 and only exposed after the surface was scorched in the Bobcat fire. Based on the degree of decomposition and the multi-year climate conditions in Angeles National Forest, the forensic team estimated the time of death coincided with the year Rachel disappeared, 2007, allowing a direct link between the remains and the missing person case. Experts then analyzed soil and ash samples from the scene. In the soil layer immediately beneath the area where bones were found, they discovered unusually compacted soil patches, compaction typical of soil being dug up and refilled by hand or crude tools. There were no signs of animal scavenging, and soil samples showed disrupted layering consistent with temporary burial. In the overlying ash layer, there were many partially burned plant debris and dry leaf material, proving the body was exposed after the fire rather than before. Another important detail in the anthropology report: many small bone fragments were found 1-2 meters from the main location, but the majority remained concentrated within a narrow radius, indicating the body had not been widely scattered by wildlife during decomposition. This implied the body had been relatively well covered in the initial period. The scorched fabric and zipper found nearby were heavily damaged by heat, but could still be identified as parts of female clothing, with fabric weave patterns similar to clothing described in Rachel's 2007 file. No other personal items were found, consistent with Rachel having left all her belongings at home before disappearing. After combining skull data, decomposition level, soil and ash analysis, and burial pattern, the forensic lab reached its final conclusion: Rachel Flores died from strong external force applied to the head, causing severe skull trauma, and her body was subsequently temporarily buried in a remote area of Angeles National Forest. All forensic elements, from the wound pattern, discovery location, to burial signs, were consistent with homicide rather than accident or self-inflicted injury. This conclusion not only confirmed Rachel as the victim of deliberate violent action, but also placed the entire 2007 disappearance in a completely different context. This was no longer a case of an adult disappearing for unknown reasons, but a murder disguised as a prolonged disappearance, lasting many years. The forensic determination that Rachel Flores was killed by blunt force and her body temporarily buried forced Glendale PD to immediately request the case be reopened and return to active investigation status. The cold case file was reassigned to Detective Maya Hernandez, a member of the unit specializing in long-pending cases in Los Angeles County. Upon receiving the file, Maya spent many days reviewing all documents from 2007 statement transcripts, search reports, camera review results, indoor scene analysis, and all internal PD notes. With the new 2021 data, especially the conclusion of death by external force and the burial location, Maya focused on cross-referencing every detail in Daniel's statements against what was now considered objective evidence. Starting with Daniel's main statement, Maya noted the contradictions previously flagged in the old file but never clarified at the time. Daniel said he called Rachel many times that afternoon, but the call log showed only one call. He said he left the station around 6:25 p.m., but LAPD records showed he left nearly half an hour earlier. He said he arrived home at 7 p.m., but the actual travel route took no more than 20 minutes. In the 2007 context without a body, these discrepancies were viewed as minor details, possibly attributable to memory error. But combined with evidence that Rachel was killed and buried, Maya recognized that the time periods Daniel described were not merely inaccurate but created blank gaps that align precisely with the window in which the victim could have been attacked, removed from the house, and taken to a remote location. Maya rebuilt an accurate timeline of April 17th based on 4 sources: witness statements, LAPD duty logs, phone data, and 2021 forensic findings. According to this timeline, Rachel was last seen around noon. Neighbors later heard arguing between 1:15 and 1:40 p.m. No one saw Rachel after 2 p.m. Daniel could not prove any contact or interaction with his wife during that time, and especially the period when he left work earlier than reported and arrived home later than reality, created a gap of over 60 minutes beyond any verification. Comparing the accurate timeline with his original statement, Maya saw that Daniel had not only altered minor details, but that his entire afternoon and evening movements contained unexplained blind spots that coincided with the estimated time of death, according to forensics. Maya re-examined the 2007 indoor scene inspection and realized that details once considered insignificant, a slightly shifted chair, a half-dried glass that didn't match Daniel's described timeline, a stray fiber in the living room, could now carry entirely different significance. If Rachel had been attacked at home or shortly before leaving, these could be traces of disturbance that investigators at the time lacked context to properly evaluate. Most importantly, the fact that Rachel left her phone, purse, and keys at home became more significant than ever in domestic violence or marital homicide cases. Victims often have no opportunity to take personal items, and this is incompatible with any voluntary departure scenario. Maya also cross-referenced the discovery location in Angeles National Forest with access points a vehicle could reach in 2007. By combining old traffic maps and scene data, she determined the area was just over 30 minutes drive from Glendale, fitting the unaccounted time window in Daniel's afternoon on the day of the incident. Putting the pieces together, contradictory statements, time gaps, indoor traces, burial location, and cause of death conclusion, Maya began forming a major suspicion. The 2007 missing person scene may have been staged to conceal a murder that occurred inside or near the home. The fact that Rachel left no trace of leaving the house, appeared on no cameras, had no financial transactions, and was found in a completely remote area inconsistent with her normal travel habits, made the voluntary disappearance scenario indefensible. From this point, Maya classified the Rachel Flores case not merely as a homicide, but as a staged murder, with Daniel Flores emerging as the only person who had the opportunity, time, and access to the victim during the critical time window on the day of the crime. As suspicions that Daniel staged the disappearance scene grew increasingly evident, Detective Maya Hernandez shifted to a digital investigation direction, focusing on data that had previously been deemed insufficiently valuable in 2007 due to technological limitations at the time. With support from the LASD Cybercrimes Unit, Maya requested the full recovery of the Flores family's electronic data, including Rachel's and Daniel's email accounts, browsing history from the family computer, and deleted files on the old hard drive that had been sealed since the initial investigation. The first step was to access the Yahoo Mail account that Daniel had used as a secondary email. This account had not been thoroughly examined in 2007 because there was no specific reason for suspicion. However, modern recovery technology made it possible to extract deeply deleted folders from the storage servers. Once the technical specialist completed the recovery, Maya received a list of emails deleted in the days leading up to and immediately following Rachel's disappearance. While some emails were unremarkable, 3 stood out. One containing a link to an article about pre-warning behaviors of adults intending to disappear, one leading to a blog discussion about how long a shallow buried body takes to be discovered, and one related to steps to trace phones in criminal investigations. All were either sent to Daniel's email or opened by him via links, with access times falling within the 2 weeks prior to April 17th. Maya noted this as potential evidence of deliberate preparation or research. The next phase involved recovering the browsing history from the family computer and device that, in 2007, the PD had only performed a basic check on, finding nothing noteworthy. Using modern digital forensics tools, the technical team recovered numerous entries from the index, DAT folder, and deleted cache files. During late March and early April 2007, the computer recorded a series of searches related to 3 main topic groups. First, missing adult cases in California and how police assess risk levels. Second, body disposal locations in the forested areas of Los Angeles County, including maps of Angeles National Forest, Verdugo Mountains, and burial depth to prevent animal disturbance. Third, the possibility of police tracking powered-off phones, the accuracy of cell tower pings, and data retention periods. These searches, all occurring before Rachel vanished, caught Maya's particular attention because there was no reasonable explanation for Rachel to research such legal or body disposal-related content. When cross-referenced with Daniel's statement that Rachel didn't know much about technology and rarely searched anything complex, Maya noted a significant inconsistency. Many queries occurred during times when Daniel was at home, according to the computer activity logs. In addition to search history, the team also recovered several completely deleted files, a PDF map of Angeles National Forest, a screenshot containing information about low-traffic areas in the forest, and a short text file listing disjointed keywords such as depth, dig, bury, soft soil, and natural erosion. Although the text file had no date stamp, system metadata showed it was created and modified in early April. These files had been deleted before the PD seized the computer in 2007, but since the hard drive had not been fully overwritten, they remained recoverable. Maya viewed this as a breakthrough because all the files directly related to the context in which Rachel's remains were found 14 years later. As the recovered digital data was layered onto the accurate timeline Maya had constructed, a clear picture began to emerge. Daniel had researched disappearances, phone tracking, and body burial before Rachel vanished. The family computer was the primary device used for most queries, and the timing of the searches coincided with periods when Rachel had no reason to conduct such research. Moreover, Daniel's complete erasure of history before the 2007 investigation, undetected at the time due to technological limitations, now stood as a clear indicator of intentional concealment. Maya made a preliminary assessment that this data was not random, but showed signs of preparation, researching disappearances to stage a scenario, researching burial to handle aftermath, and researching phone tracking to avoid detection during movement. When combined with forensic evidence confirming Rachel was murdered and temporarily buried, Maya saw the digital data as the missing piece the 2007 case file could not access. These elements laid critical groundwork for the scenario that the crime was not spontaneous but had likely been premeditated. With the digital evidence recovered from the family computer, Detective Maya Hernandez moved to the next crucial step, verifying whether Daniel had traveled to Angeles National Forest around the time of Rachel's disappearance by analyzing two independent data sources: the ECU of the vehicle Daniel drove in 2007 and cell tower logs from his phone during the same period. The car Daniel drove when Rachel disappeared was a 2003 sedan, which the PD had seized and sealed when the case was reopened. In 2007, the ECU of vehicles from that era only recorded basic data such as speed, engine start-stop times, and number of engine stops, with no integrated GPS. However, with 2021 technology, the LASD mechanical forensics team was able to extract the complete operation log, including engine on-off timestamps and RPM data combined with terrain conditions to determine the type of surface the vehicle had traveled over. When analyzing the ECU data from April 17, 2007, they recorded 3 engine on-off events consistent with Daniel's statement, one in the morning before heading to LAPD Metro Division, one around 5:52 p.m. when he left the agency parking lot, and another around 7 p.m. in Glendale. However, what stood out was that between the last 2 on-off events, the ECU recorded a sudden change in engine load, indicative of driving up a long incline, along with prolonged low RPM data, a sign of slow travel on uneven terrain. These parameters did not match the flat, low-incline route from downtown LA to Glendale, but aligned with the terrain conditions of certain roads leading into Angeles National Forest. Notably, the ECU recorded the engine being off for approximately 12 minutes at a location that, when cross-referenced with slope maps and travel time, the analysis team determined had a high probability of matching a wide clearing less than 1 mile from where Rachel's remains were discovered. This was data the police in 2007 could neither extract nor interpret, but in 2021 it became a critical puzzle piece. After completing the ECU analysis, Maya moved on to processing the cell tower logs from Daniel's phone. Although 2007 data was not as comprehensive as today's and lacked GPS, the phone still pinged the nearest tower whenever it was powered on, sent messages, or made calls. Fortunately, Glendale PD had previously obtained cell tower data from the carrier in the year Rachel disappeared, though nothing unusual was identified at the time. When re-examining the old data with fresh eyes, Maya noticed something previously overlooked at approximately 6:18 p.m. on April 17th. Daniel's phone registered with a tower located on the southern slope of Angeles National Forest, a location he had no reason to be near. About 20 minutes later, the signal switched to a tower near Glendale, consistent with the time Daniel claimed he arrived home. Thus, during the period he could not account for, Daniel's phone had actually been near the forest where Rachel's body was later found. A cell site analyst re-examined the signals and confirmed that the distance to this tower could only occur if the device was on a trail or vehicle-accessible area, ruling out mere signal interference or routing error. When combining the cell tower data with the ECU data, the pattern of movement became much clearer. Daniel's vehicle had driven up a forest road consistent with Angeles National Forest terrain, stopped for a period long enough for someone to leave the vehicle, move into the wooded area, and return. The fact that the ECU recorded the engine load change at the exact time the cell tower captured the signal led Maya to conclude that the two completely independent data sources matched in a way that could not be coincidental. From this, Maya mapped a plausible travel route for Daniel that afternoon, leaving Metro Division at 5:52, driving into Angeles National Forest via the Southern Mountain Road, stopping near the burial site, remaining long enough to perform some action, then leaving the area and returning to Glendale, arriving home around 7 p.m. as initially stated. However, instead of simply traffic as claimed, the data showed he had entered one of the most remote forested areas of LA County. When synthesizing the ECU data, cell tower records, and terrain maps, Maya reached a preliminary investigative conclusion. Daniel Flores was present, near the location where Rachel's body was buried on the afternoon of April 17, 2007. Precisely during the unaccounted-for time window he had not explained for 14 years. When the ECU and cell tower data showed Daniel was near the discovery site of Rachel's remains during the exact unexplained time gap, Detective Maya Hernandez entered the phase of compiling all evidence for presentation to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. This critical step required every piece to be logically and consistently connected, transforming 14 years of fragmented evidence into a persuasive legal narrative. The first group of evidence was forensic from the skeletal remains. Conclusion that Rachel died from traumatic brain injury caused by blunt force, with skull fractures consistent with intentional impact, not accident. The shallow burial indicated concealment. The burial location deep in Angeles National Forest did not match any of the victim's habits or usual routes. The second group was digital forensics, deleted Yahoo emails containing content about body burial, disappearances, and phone tracing mechanisms. Recovered 2007 family computer search history showing topics directly related to body disposal, Louisiana forest roads, and device location methods. Deleted files including forest maps and personal notes related to burial. This data established premeditation prior to Rachel's disappearance and was all performed on devices Daniel had access to. The third group was the timeline, cross-referencing Daniel's statements with witness accounts, LAPD duty logs, computer usage history, and timestamps on April 17th, revealed multiple contradictions. Daniel left work earlier than reported, returned home later than stated. No proof of attempting to contact Rachel and extended gaps over 1 hour, precisely when Rachel was assessed to have gone missing. These gaps aligned with the forensic time estimate for moving the body from Glendale. The fourth group was movement route, vehicle ECU, recorded engine load changes consistent with mountain roads, and an extended stop near the burial site. Cell tower logs showed Daniel's phone connecting to a tower on the Angeles National Forest slope at a time matching both the ECU data and the critical gap in his timeline. This evidence was particularly strong because the two independent sources corroborated each other. The fifth group was motive. Within the digital forensics records, Maya found emails between Daniel and a female colleague showing an extramarital relationship beginning in late 2006. The level of intimacy gradually increased. Content repeatedly referenced marital conflicts and desire for a fresh start. While not direct proof of the crime, this provided a strong motive consistent with patterns seen in troubled marriage homicides. After completing the comprehensive file, Maya prepared a report exceeding 200 pages, presenting each evidence group chronologically: preparation before Rachel's disappearance, actions and movements on the day of the crime, and forensic confirmation of homicide. The report was submitted to the DA, along with a request for an arrest warrant for Daniel Flores on first-degree murder charges, based on elements of intent, premeditation, concealment of the body, and staging a disappearance scene. After 2 internal review sessions and consultations with forensic experts, the district attorney formally approved the request. The arrest warrant was signed in early October 2021. Daniel's arrest was planned carefully because he was a former LAPD officer with potential to react and access weapons. Glendale PD coordinated with LASD for a safe apprehension. Early one weekday morning, as Daniel stepped outside to retrieve the newspaper, the tactical team moved in and ordered him to raise his hands. Daniel was immediately handcuffed with no resistance, but showed clear shock when informed the warrant concerned Rachel's death. Police executed a search warrant on the residence, seizing additional old storage devices, personal documents, notes, and an old phone kept as a memento that might contain recoverable data. All evidence was sealed and transferred to the prosecution unit. As Daniel was led away, the case that had faded into obscurity since 2007 officially entered the prosecution phase, now supported by a solid legal and scientific foundation, proving the 14-year disappearance was not random, but the result of a carefully concealed crime. Daniel Flores' arrest opened the door to the prosecution phase, and the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office quickly built the indictment based on the complete chain of evidence collected by Detective Maya Hernandez. In the preliminary hearing, the prosecution began by presenting the case timeline in logical order: Rachel's 2007 disappearance, the stalled investigation, the 2021 discovery of remains, and the digital and forensic evidence reinforcing the theory of intentional homicide. The prosecution detailed the forensic anthropology findings. Rachel's skull showed a depressed fracture from a single strong impact point, with radiating cracks completely inconsistent with accident or fall. The bones showed no significant animal damage, indicating initial burial at sufficient depth. Soil structure revealed signs of manual digging and backfilling with crude tools. The prosecution emphasized that these characteristics only appear in homicide cases and were incompatible with any natural death hypothesis. Next, the prosecution presented the digital forensics, the strongest pillar of the case. Yahoo emails deleted by Daniel in 2007 but fully recovered, containing research on phone tracing capabilities, methods to bury bodies to prevent animal discovery, and classifications of missing adult cases by police. Family computer search history prior to Rachel's disappearance, showing queries about Angeles National Forest terrain and missing person investigation mechanisms. The prosecution argued these were not coincidences, but evidence of premeditation. The forest map, digging depth notes, and screenshots of forest access points further reinforced that Daniel had studied the matter beforehand. The prosecution then presented movement data. Daniel's vehicle ECU recorded engine load changes corresponding to hilly roads and an extended stop near the body location. Cell tower logs showed his phone connecting to a tower near Angeles National Forest precisely during the unexplained gap in his timeline, coinciding with the estimated time of Rachel's death. The prosecution stressed that these two sources, mechanical and telecommunications, were entirely independent yet matched, making coincidence virtually impossible. Additionally, Daniel's reported timeline contained numerous contradictions. He left work earlier than stated, returned home later than necessary, provided no proof of attempting to contact Rachel, and created an unexplained gap longer than 1 hour. The prosecution synthesized that it was during this gap that Daniel transported Rachel's body to the forest and buried it temporarily. During the defense's cross-examination, Daniel's attorney focused on attacking the precision of the forensic analysis. The bones were in a wildfire area and could have been deformed. 14 years of decomposition could lead to errors in cause-of-death determination. Fracture patterns might have occurred post-exposure due to the Bobcat fire and heat effects. There were no direct eyewitnesses to the crime. They also questioned the digital forensics. Search history could have been performed by anyone in the household. Deleted files did not prove motive or action. Cell tower pings could be distorted by mountainous terrain. The defense further argued that Daniel lacked a clear motive, claiming the marriage had only minor conflicts and that an emotional affair was insufficient to drive murder. However, the prosecution systematically rebutted each point. Regarding the skeletal forensics, they called an expert to confirm that the skull fracture pattern could not result from heat. It was a fresh fracture occurring only while the bone retained elasticity. On the cell tower argument, they presented a telecommunications expert who explained that the recorded tower was in an area very difficult for a phone to connect to unless in direct signal range. Interference could not cause a signal to jump to such a distant tower. In countering the digital forensics challenge, the prosecution pointed out that most queries occurred during hours Daniel was home per LAPD logs, and Rachel would not have conducted highly technical searches such as locating a powered-off device. Regarding the timeline, the prosecution emphasized that Daniel was the only person with opportunity to access the victim during the critical period, and his contradictory statements were only plausible as efforts to conceal actions. Finally, the prosecution concluded that only the scenario of Daniel killing Rachel at or near home, then transporting her body to Angeles National Forest and staging a disappearance, simultaneously explained the skull injury, the burial of the body, the sole presence of one person at the key moment, the deleted search history, the movement route matching ECU and cell tower data, and the complete absence of any trace of the victim leaving the house. The prosecution stressed that no other scenario from accident to suicide could account for the entire chain of evidence. With a consistent argument that transformed all technical data into powerful circumstantial evidence, the prosecution concluded its presentation, placing the jury before a sequence of events in which the staged disappearance emerged as the only solution fitting every piece of evidence in the record. After many weeks of intense debate, with the full evidentiary record presented and challenged, the trial moved into the decision phase. The jury was instructed to consider each evidence group both independently and collectively: the skull forensics, recovered digital data, ECU and cell tower-based movement analysis, contradictions in Daniel's statements, and the marital context including the affair motive. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom in a heavy but resolute atmosphere. When asked by the judge, the jury foreperson announced the verdict: Daniel Flores was guilty of first-degree murder under California Penal Code 187. The verdict was read in absolute silence in the courtroom, a silence that conveyed both the weight of 14 years of waiting and the final closure of a case once thought unsolvable. The court then proceeded to sentencing. Considering the deliberate nature of the crime, premeditation, efforts to conceal by staging a disappearance scene, and burial in a remote forest to prevent discovery, the judge imposed the maximum sentence under PC 187, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. This sentence reflected the court's assessment that Daniel's conduct was both calculated and demonstrated a high degree of dangerousness, leaving no basis for considering community reintegration. As Daniel was escorted from the courtroom, the Rachel Flores case officially closed on the legal level, though its aftershocks continued to resonate throughout the Glendale community and the Los Angeles County Cold Case Investigation Unit. The file was placed in the cold case solved category, long-standing unsolved cases successfully resolved thanks to advances in forensic science and the persistence of investigators. In the final summary report, Glendale PD highlighted the key factors that cracked the case after more than a decade: First, the discovery of the remains due to the unforeseen consequence of the Bobcat fire, which exposed the burial location. Next, forensic anthropology, which determined cause of death through skull trauma analysis. Then digital forensics, especially the recovery of emails and search history from 2007, data that technology of the time could not retrieve, followed by movement analysis using ECU and cell tower logs. Two independent sources that matched to prove Daniel's presence at the burial area, and finally, the reconstruction of an accurate timeline, exposing unexplainable gaps and inconsistencies in Daniel's statements. Together, these pieces formed a complete logical chain, eliminating every possibility except deliberate homicide. The conclusion of the case made the Rachel Flores file a testament to the power of interdisciplinary investigation, where traditional forensics, digital analysis, mechanical data, and telecommunications converge to reconstruct the truth. It also became a landmark example in the California justice system of how a disappearance once thought permanently unsolvable could still be brought to light. As long as evidence is preserved, reanalyzed, and cross-referenced with advanced technology. The case is closed, but its lessons continue to be cited in cold case investigation training programs across Los Angeles. Every detail, no matter how small, can become the key that unlocks the entire truth. Given enough time, persistence, and scientific progress to piece together what was obscured for 14 years. The story of the Rachel Flores case, though beginning in 2007, reflects many issues that remain highly relevant in contemporary American life, especially domestic violence, warning signs in marital relationships, and the critical role of technology in criminal investigations. Before her disappearance, Rachel left no obvious signs that she was about to face danger, but small details, the loud argument overheard by neighbors in the early afternoon, her unusual silence throughout the rest of the day, and the fact that her phone and purse remained at home were all red flags that those around her, accustomed to everyday calm, failed to notice sufficiently. In American society, where domestic violence persists despite strong public awareness campaigns, this story reminds us that observing and reporting anomalies in the community is not only a social responsibility, but sometimes literally life-saving. Another lesson comes from Daniel's behavior: shifting statements, mismatched timelines, unexplainable gaps, all reflect how deception often begins with the smallest details. In relationships, especially marriage, transparency and consistency are foundational. When someone repeatedly adjusts their story to fit circumstances, it can be a sign of a larger truth being hidden. Additionally, the story demonstrates the role of technology in uncovering truth. Digital forensics, cell tower logs, and ECU data, tools that could not be fully exploited in 2007, became the keys to solving the case in 2021. This reminds us that in the modern world, every action leaves a digital trace. The lesson for individuals is not fear of surveillance, but the understanding that technology can protect victims and expose dangerous behavior. Knowledge of how data operates in modern life is a way for each person to live more safely and responsibly in an increasingly technology-dependent society. Thank you for following this tenacious and painful journey of solving the case. Please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next quest to uncover the truth. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore how justice is served, no matter how much time has passed.